So to begin, my name is Danny Thomas. I'm the project manager for this implementation integration project between iLab and Penn State University. I've been working with Misty and Jim for just about a year at this point, and we'll be handing the project off this week to another project manager named Jesse. The goal of the presentation today is to give you an overview of what iLab is and cover critical items for PIs and lab managers within the functionality of the system. We will review the login process, and then we'll walk through different ways to navigate throughout the system in iLab. So let's start by logging in. And the very first thing that you should know is to log in, you'll come to this URL right here, psu.corefacilities.org. And you'll see a screen that looks just like this. This is a landing page that Misty has developed, and your logins area is right up here on the top right. There's a green login screen. When I click that login, you'll get a pop-up that has sort of two portals here, one for internal Penn State users with an access ID and one for external users. Obviously, you'll click the one for the internal users, and that will take you to a single sign-on screen, which you're very familiar with. Now, there's two different approaches that we should cover in the presentation today. For PIs that have sponsored funds or restricted funds in the system, your accounts will be automatically created with a nightly upload, and your labs will be created, and that process will happen automatically. So you'll simply need to log into the system. Your ID and all of that information is already added to the system through this nightly upload. If you don't have restricted funds available and you're using only restricted funds for research, you will need to go through a registration process. If you haven't previously registered for iLab and it's your first time logging in, you'll need to go through a registration process. At that point, you'll land on a screen. You'll follow the single sign-on steps, and then you'll land on a registration screen that looks like this. And this screen will ask you to select your PI or your lab. And at that point, you'll select the administration lab, and then there will be an institutional process in which Misty will create a lab for you and assign you as the PI of that lab. You'll then have the opportunity to, through the system, request those unrestricted funds that you have access to. Once you've logged in, you'll land on a home screen that looks like this. The first several times that you log in, for the first several months that you're logging in, you'll see this Welcome to iLab Getting Started screen, and it's just a quick overview of information and some basic functionality. You'll get very used to just scrolling past it. Some key areas on your home screen to pay attention to are this home area. And what you're going to see in this home area is any notifications that you've had or unread messages. Now, you'll also get these notifications in your email inbox as well, but iLab collects them here in the system. And you'll be able to see which cores you've been interacting with. You'll have quick access to the facilities you've been interacting with in the last 2 months on this home screen. Finally, at the bottom of this home screen, you'll see a list of service requests that are requiring action. Now, that could be an approval of something that has exceeded a price threshold, or something that needs payment information added. It could be agreeing to a request. There is another area in the system, which we'll come to in a moment, where you'll have a much higher level of ability to interact with these service requests. This is a quick access, quick action area to interact with those service requests. But you don't have a deep level or degree of information here. It's sort of an area to just if you need to take quick action. The very last area on your home screen that I'm going to talk about, and you'll actually have this this navigation area. And it will actually appear throughout the system. No matter where you are, you'll have this navigation screen on the left-hand side. And this is an area that allows you to find your way to different important areas in the system that you'll need to interact with. And I'm going to talk about them one by one, and we'll work our way down in terms of what they are. And then we'll start at the bottom and discuss them one at a time, working our way back up. So your home screen is where we are right now, and you can quickly access those communications that I talked about and go directly to them through this navigation screen as well. The core facilities link is going to be a list of all the core facilities that are active at your core, and you'll also be able to or at your institution, I should say. You'll also be able to access core facilities that are live in the system at other institutions through this list as well. Your view requests link is going to take you to the place I just talked about, where you have more interaction with these service requests in the system. View funds is actually not going to apply unless you're an owner of unrestricted funds. Typically for PIs and lab managers, this view funds link is not an area that you will interact with. Your list all cores is redundant to this core facilities link. It's just another area to access your core facilities. Invoices, pretty intuitive. That's going to be an area where you're going to see all invoices pertaining to you or your lab in the system. Your reporting link or reporting module is going to give you access to our robust reporting system, and we'll look at that in depth in a moment. Where I believe you're going to be using the system the most is in this My Groups area. And we'll go ahead and start there and work our way back up. When you click on this link, it takes you to a screen that will show you a list of all the groups or labs that you're a manager of or that you interact with. You also have a pop-up over here to the right that you can use to access directly any of those labs. If you're a PI for multiple research groups, or you're a PI for one and a member of another research group or lab, this is the area that you would see a list of those research groups or labs. To navigate directly to the research group or lab that you're a PI for, you'll click on your name. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the naming convention for these labs. So we are naming all the labs or research groups in the system, last name of the PI, first name of the PI, institutional slug, and then lab. And we do this for a number of reasons. Primarily, it's a requirement for how the lab functionality or research group functionality interacts with our financial integration. It's also beneficial for our support team to have consistency in how the research groups or labs are named in the system. When you land on your research group or lab, by default, you're going to land on this Members tab. You'll notice over here on the right, these navigational tabs. And this is just different areas of your research group or lab functionality. And you'll notice consistently throughout the system, this is how we have areas or functions of the system organized with these navigation tabs. On the Members tab, the first thing that you're going to see is a lab-wide approval setting. And this is an auto approval threshold. And what we're talking about when we say auto approval threshold is essentially this is the amount that the members of this lab, the researchers that are part of this research group, can spend without PI approval, without PI notification. As soon as any researcher exceeds that amount on any project request in the system, the PI is going to get a notification asking for approval. We also, and this is set automatically when every lab is created. You also have the ability to set it at an individual, more granular level for each researcher in the system. Below the auto approval threshold setting, you'll see a list of lab members and settings for each of those members. So on the left-hand side, you'll see each researcher's name, and then as you move across the right, you'll see different information about that researcher. By default, each of these researchers is going to match the auto approval amount. You'll have some financial integration information here. Then you'll have contact info for the researcher, email and phone number. And then you have a start date and an end date. And this is not necessarily the most intuitive part of this area, but what you can do with a start date and an end date is manage the time duration for a particular researcher to be a member for a lab. This is beneficial, as an example, when PI has a grad student working for them as a year-long internship or something like that, and we know they're going to start September 1st and end in the summer. We can set that end date so that they'll drop from the lab and no longer be receiving notifications for that lab or have access to any of the funds. To make updates or changes to a researcher in the lab, you can click on the pencil next to the researcher all the way to the right. And here you can change their level of access, right? And so by default, each researcher is going to be a member. You can make them a manager, which will give them financial approval authority and notifications authority, or you can make them yes.
Can you make it just a hair bigger? It's
Yep.
kind of hard to see.
You bet.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So once you've made someone a manager, you can also make them a financial contact, which will allow them to receive invoice and financial notifications on behalf of the lab. We can make adjustments to their auto approval amount over here on the right-hand side as well. Once we've made those changes, we can save them over here on the right-hand side, and then they'll update in the system. You can remove any user from your lab manually by clicking on the red X, although the system does not allow you to remove yourself from a lab. You can add new researchers to the lab by clicking on Link Existing User and searching for a user in the system. Once the system, and oops, I guess I thought you were in here, Misty. To add a researcher to the system, they'll need to register and be in iLab before you can add them to your lab. The first tab in your lab interface or your research group interface is the membership requests and account cost centers tab. We'll navigate there now. And this is where you'd manage funding access for your researchers and actually approve requests for researchers to be members of your lab. So you'll see here on the top part of this this area, membership requests. I'm going to jump over to a screenshot here now, and we'll come back. And we'll try to make this a little bit bigger as well. When a researcher registers for an account in iLab, if they're a member of your lab, they'll list you as the PI or as the research group, and then you'll get a notification in your email and also when you log into the system, letting you know that somebody has requested access to your lab. The notification in the system will appear as a red dot on the membership requests tab, and at the top of your screen, you'll see the name of the researcher, the date they requested access, and their contact information. You'll have these action buttons here which allow you to accept or reject them as a member of your lab or research group. I'm jumping back to our testing interface now so that we can look at the fund grid. So below the membership request area, we'll see an area where you can manage accounts and cost centers. We call this area the fund grid. And what you're going to see, again, is members of the lab on the left-hand side, and then funds or account cost centers that those members have access to across the top. The grid allows you to check a box. Oops, I did that yesterday too. Or uncheck a box to deny access to a researcher, or check a box to grant access to a researcher. There's not a way to confirm. The system will show you that or indicate to you that it's confirmed access by this green box surrounding the checkbox area. There we go. All right, unchecked one, and it tracked the change. If you're trying to remove access to a funding source that currently has a project awaiting billing, the system will prevent you from removing that until the billing is completed for that particular project. Below the fund grid is an area where you can request access to account cost centers that are non-sponsored or unrestricted funds. You'll see an area where you can enter the account cost center in the system. And below that, you'll see a list of the account cost centers that you have requested access to and the status of those account cost centers. This list can get very long if you're using a lot of unrestricted funds. So you have the ability to archive those. You can pull them back up once they've been archived. If you don't want to see this long list here, though, you do have the option to archive these details. Below the account cost center request is an area that allows you to disable or enable account cost centers. And again, as with granting access to a researcher, you can't disable an account cost center that currently has billing, that is currently awaiting billing. What disabling an account cost center does is pull it off of the list that researchers have access to, but it will keep it in the system. If you want to be able to use it yourself as a PI, but don't want your researchers to have access to it, or it just takes it off the rolls for a time. Let's take a look at actually requesting an account cost center. I'm going to cheat a little bit and pull up an account cost center that I tested before, and we'll take that opportunity to talk about how you need to format an account cost center when you're making a request. And there's a little bit of help text here to remind you. But essentially, you need to separate the account cost center with a slash. So the account needs to be listed first, and then here in this section, then you'll have a slash, and then you'll have the cost center listed after the slash. Once you've requested that account cost center, you'll see it added to the list, and you'll be able to track the progress. You can see who owned it. And the owner of that account cost center will need to log into the system and approve your request for access for your non-sponsored or unrestricted funds in the system. We're going to move now to the Budgets tab of your research group screen. In the Budgets tab, you have the ability to set up a tracking system for spending in your lab. And you can track spending at any particular facility at the institution. You can also track spending by individual researchers. You can set up the date range for that tracking and what interval you're tracking. And then you can set up a budgeted amount, and then it will show you, the system will show you the percentage of that budgeted amount. Now, this isn't going to restrict spending, and it's not going to stop researchers if they max their budget. This is essentially a way for you to visually quickly track that information. If you want to stop them from spending, that's when you would go in and deactivate the funds that they had access to, or just remove their access from the fund. Your bulletin board tab is going to track activity in the system, and it's going to give you a place to add notifications. I think in most cases, researchers and PIs are probably communicating via email, but you do have an area within the system to add messages and comments or set up notifications about interacting with facilities in iLab. And finally, your group settings, most of which are going to be set up by default when the lab is created by that fund file upload. But you do have the ability here, something key, to set communication settings. And for PIs who are going to be delegating a lab manager, this is going to be key functionality. If you want to have your lab manager be the person who receives financial notifications or invoices and approvals, then you want to set that person up as your primary contact. So that is our lab area. The next area that we're going to take a look at is the invoices link. The reporting link. So the reporting link, again, as I mentioned, is a very robust area of the system and allows you access to a wide range of data. When you click on reporting home, you land on this interface here. And the key thing to remember about this interface is that there's a tutorial here that goes in depth. It's about 15-20 minutes of in-depth functionality and how to set up a report and pull information from the system. I'm going to give you today a very high-level glance at the reporting module. So to get directly into your reporting module, you'll click on this link here that says spending by all labs I manage. And we're going to go ahead and load a default report today just to give you a glance of what's available. So what you're looking at here is essentially the ability to group data in the system and then define a visual display for that data. And you've got a wide range of options. You can create bar graphs and pie charts and data tables. And you have filters over here on the left-hand side that allow you to drill down and get very specific about what information you're viewing in those data sets. You have the ability to configure those data sets up here along the top. But I don't want to spend too much time on that today because you do have that tutorial available to you. The last thing I want to touch on is that you have the ability to pull information out of the system as a CSV and then manipulate it and edit it or create pivot tables and use all the powerful functionality that Excel offers. Your next area in your navigation menu that we're going to hit on is your invoices link. And this is going to show you a list of all the invoices in the system that pertain to you or your lab. The first thing I'll touch on is, again, those filters on the left-hand side. Anywhere that you've got a long list of information or a queue of information in the system, you'll find these a set of filters on the left-hand side, allowing you to drill down and pull a specific group of information into view. Your queue or list of invoices here is going to show you a high level of information about the invoice. So you'll have the date the invoice was created, which core facility is billing you, an invoice number for reference, which lab is being billed. So if you're, again, a member of multiple labs or doing work as a researcher for another PI's lab, for example, you'll see that invoice that you're being billed for here as well. The invoice owner is the next column. The payment number column is going to show you all the payment sources or account cost centers that are associated with that particular invoice. You've got pricing information and then your status information, due and whether or not it's paid. And then finally, you've got an approval status. On the far right, you have some action links that allow you to interact with a particular invoice. So the first communication bubble here allows you to interact with the invoice by adding a comment or a note, and we'll go ahead and add a second comment here. And we can add or edit the notes. So we'll change this note and submit it. And that we'll take a look when we look at the actual invoice where those comments and notes appear on the invoice in just a moment. The envelope icon allows you to email this invoice. Oh, I think it's not going to let me do it because I already emailed it. Let's come back. Apologies. We'll take a look at emailing a different invoice here. We'll come back to emailing invoices. There may be a glitch in my demo, in my test environment today. What we're going to do next is take a look at the actual invoice itself. And you do that by clicking on the magnifying glass link. And from here, you can see detailed information about the invoice. And you'll notice that each invoice is, the charges in the invoice are grouped by request. So we've got a request at the top, and these request numbers identify unique requests in the system. So the invoice is from the metabolomics core, and each of the requests within the metabolomics core have a unique ID, and the charges are grouped under that unique ID. And you can get detailed information then about the charge, the name of the charge, when the charge was added, and then the payment information for that particular charge. You'll notice here on this invoice some red arrows indicating that some of the charges on this invoice need payment information. They came through to the billing area without having payment information selected, or the payment information that was originally selected for those charges expired prior to billing. So I can make edits or updates to the charge information on the invoice as I'm reviewing it. I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to designate that this particular charge will be paid for with this account cost center. And then I'm going to save that change. And now you'll see this ultimately, this yellow yield sign or yellow exclamation point will change to a blue check mark indicating that I've made updates there. The other thing that we can do here in this area is split charges out. So you can do that by clicking on the split charge and then the split charge icon here. And then I can designate an amount for different cost centers. And you can do that at the invoice level as well as the individual charges within an invoice. Over here on the left-hand side, you'll see a red box, and there's the comment screen. When I click that open, here's the a comment tracker, and it's indicating with a date and time stamp the comments that have been added to an invoice. And down below, you can see where I've edited or updated the note on this invoice. I'm going to close that invoice screen. We've got some navigation areas up at the top of the screen that allow us to navigate back to our home page. I can hide the details of the invoices and just look at the charges if I want and pull the details back up. We're going to go back to our invoice list now, and you'll notice that when I open that invoice, it opened as a separate tab in my browser, so I can navigate back and forth between and have multiple invoices open between this invoice screen and the invoice itself. I'm going to try one more time clicking on the email functionality here. I'm not sure what's happening there. I'll take a look at that. We'll have to come back to that. The next link in this left-hand side that we're going to take a look at in your navigation menu is the List All Cores link. And as I mentioned earlier, this is going to show you a list of all the active cores at your institution by default when you first land on it. From here, you can click on the drop down at the top of the screen, and you can look at, you'll see a list of cores throughout the system that are active in iLab, and they're grouped by institution. So here we can see Chapman, Dana-Farber, Harvard, so on and so forth. And you'll see pages of results in the system when you're live in production. The next link, again, we're going to skip this View Funds link, but the next link that we're going to take a look at in your left-hand navigation menu is this View Requests link. And I talked about this early on. In the View Requests link, you're going to have an interactive area where you can see requests that are awaiting approval or need action in the system. So the first area here is requests that are awaiting approval. So if any request has exceeded that financial approval threshold that's made by one of your researchers in the system, so a $1,200 request, for example, that exceeded that $1,000 approval threshold would appear in this list, and you'd have the opportunity to review it here. You'll also notice that you've got these filters on the left-hand side. Now in this particular screen, they are hidden by default. When your list starts to get longer, those filters will appear. The next tab in this screen is a group of invoices that would require payment information. Now you're only going to see invoices, you're only going to see project requests appear in this screen when they've gotten to the point of billing. When they're included in a billing event and they're ready for invoicing, then you'll see a request appear here that needs payment information added. Your next tab, your Processing and Recently Completed tab, is going to be a queue of project requests in the system that are ready for you to take action on, or that are currently in the system that the core is working on, or the shared facility is in action with. So you'll see here an overview of the project request, the date it was initiated, the name of the requester and their lab, a service request ID, and then the status of the project request. You'll see cost information, and you'll see both a projected cost and an actual cost, and these may be distinct. And then you'll have some action icons over here on the right-hand side, as you did with your invoices. Anywhere that you see this $sign icon is an area where you can edit or update financial information. Your communication icon is going to allow you to send an email request, an email about this particular request, and you can determine who that email should go to. If it needs to go to the financial manager of the lab, or the individual researcher, or if you want it to go to the core contact. You also have the option to add additional email addresses here, and those folks may or may not be included with an iLab account. Once you've sent that message, you'll get a confirmation. We're going to go ahead and edit or add some financial information to this project request by clicking on that $sign, and we looked at it up on the invoice as well, and we'll take a look at it here. So I'm going to go ahead and split the charge for the entire project this time rather than for the individual charges, and we'll click on the split charge button. I'm going to split it between 3 different funds. And now, by default, each of the charges within this project will be split out between those three funding sources or account cost centers. Let's take a look at the details for one of these requests. And the way that you can do that is by clicking on the blue triangle over here on the left-hand side. And when I do that, it toggles the request open. And here I can see a detailed list of the charges that are included in that request. I can take a look at the overview for that request, which is mostly going to be information about me and my lab, but I can confirm that the information is accurate. I can take a look at the payment information that's been allocated at this request. And I can add comments, and you'll notice that the emails that I add as that I send are tracked here in the comments area. There's also an area to the right of the comments where attachments can be added, and core facilities will often add attachments here. And I'm going to toggle open a second request here just so that we can take a look at a project request form. Let's see, let's find one that has a form. There we go. So you'll notice just above the list, detailed list of services, there's a view form. And when I click on the link, that's going to show me a form that was filled out on initiation of the request so that you can review details about the project if necessary. And let's see, this, as I said before, this core facilities link is essentially a duplicate functionality to the list all cores link, but we'll take a look at it here and you can see it's the same, it's essentially the same list. Cores at my institution, cores at other institutions. In our testing environment, we see cores at partner institutions, but at this point, Penn State is not going to be using that partner institution functionality, so you won't see that live in production. That completes my overview. Does anybody have any questions?
So I have a question. One of the cores that we use is called flow cytometry, and sometimes you book for a certain amount of time, but the experiment takes longer. Okay, so you need more, you end up using more hours of machine time. If the student were to go over their limit because of the experiment running longer, would that just show up as something that I have to approve, or would that stop the experiment or anything like that? Or
with scheduled time, that will not generate a PI notification. If the actual time exceeds the scheduled time, you won't be notified or have to approve that.
So if I don't approve a particular charge, they can't do it. That's my
With project requests, with service requests, that is true. That is not always the case with scheduled events.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I don't think so. I think we're okay for now.
Okay, excellent. Thanks for your time, folks. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danny.